The scream tore through the quiet of dawn, jerking old Mama Obi awake in her hut next door. To fear, she exclaimed, crossing herself instinctively. The sound of something heavy crashing to the floor followed, then a man's deep guttural roar. By the time she reached the doorway of Emmanuel's house, half of the village was already gathered. Inside, Emmanuel stood as still as a rock, his breathing shallow, his face pale. Before him, his wife Nkem knelt on the ground, clutching at the edge of her wrapper, as if it could protect her from the avalanche of shame tumbling down on her. Behind her were 7 men huddled in severe states of undress, some frozen in fears, others already attempting to escape through the back door. Abomination! Alu! It was Mama Obi who spoke first, her voice trembling with disbelief. Nkem, you invited 7 men into your house? The crowd erupted into a mix of gasps, exclamations, and whispers. Emmanuel looked around at the faces of his neighbors, his shame now a public spectacle. For months, he had ignored the rumors, dismissed the whispers. Not my Nkem. She wouldn't betray me like this. But now, the truth lay before him, a truth he could no longer deny. Nkem raised her head, her expression defiant, despite the situation. If Emmanuel can't satisfy me, she spat, her voice ringing loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. Why shouldn't I find someone who can? The crowd gasped. Even the men who had been attempting to sneak away froze at her boldness. You dare to speak? Emmanuel bellowed, his voice cracking with the weight of the humiliation. You bring the disgrace to my name, and you speak as though you are the victim. I am the victim, Nkem shouted back, rising to her feet. You promised me a life of happiness, Emmanuel, but all you gave me was hard labor and cold nights. How dare you blame me for wanting more? The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The men scattered, slipping out one by one, leaving Emmanuel and Nkem to face the wrath of the community alone. 2 years earlier, when Emmanuel married Nkem, the entire village celebrated. She was the beauty of Isu, with her glowing brown skin, full lips, and eyes that sparkled like sunlight dancing on the river. Emmanuel, though plain looking and a simple farmer, had worked tirelessly to win her heart. He offered her father the largest dowry Isu had ever seen, 10 goats, 5 rolls of clothes, and a jar of the finest palm wine from the neighboring Ibuku. At first, their marriage seemed perfect. Emmanuel doted on Nkem, tending to her every need. She in turn cooked his meal with care, and she also welcomed him home from the farm with warm smiles. They were the picture of marital bliss, the kind of couple that made others sigh with envy. But cracks began to show within a year. Nkem often complained about Emmanuel's lack of ambition. Why must I be content with farming? She would ask, her tone laced with frustration. Look at Obiora. He has started a trading business. Even Okechukwu is building a second house for his family. But you're always in the mud with your yam plants. Inakoji. Emmanuel would laugh it off, dismissing her words as idle talk. He didn't understand that beneath her complaints lay a deeper dissatisfaction, a hunger that he could neither comprehend nor satisfy. It happened one humid evening at the village stream. Nkem had gone to fetch water, her clay pot balanced effortlessly on her head. There she met Chigozie, a young carpenter known for his charm and quick wit. He complimented her smile, called her the most beautiful woman in Osu. His words stirred something in her, something Emmanuel's gentle love had never quite managed to awaken. It began innocently enough, a flirtatious smile here, a lingering touch there, but soon their meetings became more frequent, more secretive. Nkem told herself it was harmless, that she was merely enjoying the attention. But the thrill was intoxicating, and before long she found herself in Chigozie's arms, her clay pot forgotten at the stream. When she returned home that night, Emmanuel didn't notice the change in her. He kissed her neck, thanked her for preparing his favorite soup, and went to bed. Nkem lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts consumed by the memory of Chigozie's touch. One man became two, two became four. Before long, Nkem was juggling multiple lovers, each one feeding a different part of her insatiable hunger. There was Obiora, the trader with a sharp tongue and deep pockets. Uchenna, the widower who visited her under the guise of seeking advice. Even Ekene, the village priest, wasn't spared from the web of deceit. At first, Nkem was careful. She timed her illegal sexual acts, ensuring Emmanuel never suspected a thing. But as her appetite grew, so did her recklessness. She began inviting men into their home, sending Emmanuel to the farm early with promises of freshly baked bread and pepper soup when he returned. The villagers noticed, of course. Isu was a small place, and secrets didn't stay hidden for long. At first, the whispers were soft and cautious. But as Nkem escapades grew bolder, the whispers turned into open ridicule. Women pointed at her as she walked by, their eyes filled with disdain. Men smirked, exchanging knowing glances. Emmanuel heard the rumors, but refused to believe them. Nkame is my wife, he told his friend at the palm wine joint. She would never betray me. But deep down, doubt was covering him, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. That fateful morning, Emmanuel returned home earlier than usual, his arms laden with firewood. He pushed open the door and froze. The sight before him shattered whatever illusions he had left. The men scattered like frightened chickens, some tripping over themselves in the haste to escape. Emmanuel stood in the doorway, his body trembling with rage. "Nkem," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" Nkem looked up at him, her face a mixture of defiance and apathy. "Because I needed more now," she said simply, as if that explained everything. Emmanuel dropped the firewood, the loud crash echoing through the room. "You brought in 7 men into my house, into our bed." Nkem shrugged. "If you were man enough, if you were able to satisfy me enough, I wouldn't have to." The slap came before she even finished her sentence. It wasn't hard, but it was enough to silence the room. Emmanuel's hands trembled as he lowered it, his face pale with shock at what he had done. Nkem touched her cheek, her eyes blazing with anger. "Is that all you got?" she spat. Emmanuel turned and walked out of the house, leaving Nkem alone in her shame. Or what should have been shame. Instead, she sat back down, her mind plotting her next move. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dusty parts of Isu. The village buzzed with gossip as the aftermath of Nkem's kandra ripped through the community. Women gossiped as they pounded yam. Children whispered amongst themselves, and the men at the palm wine joint shook their heads in disbelief. One of them even said, "If my wife dared do that, I will beat her up and feed her to the animals in the evil forests." But none of them mattered to Nkem. She had made her choice and walked out of Emmanuel's home, her belongings wrapped in a bundle balanced on her head. The weight of judgment bore down on her with every step she took, but she refused to show it. Nkem found refuge in the small hut on the outskirts of the village, a place where she could live as she pleased without the constraints of marriage. The hut was modest, with a single room and a small compound surrounded by overgrown grass. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and for the first time in her life, she felt free. For the first few weeks, Nkem reveled in her newfound independence. Men visited her in the dead of night, their footsteps silent on the dirt path leading to her hut. She was no longer bound by the expectations of a wife. She could take lovers as she pleased, without guilt or explanation. But freedom came at a cost. The women of Isu treated her like an outcast completely. They refused to greet her in the market. Some even pulled their children away whenever she passed by, as if her mere presence might corrupt them. The men, once angered to woo her with gifts and compliments, began treating her with disdain. They came to her only under the cover of darkness, their visits quick and transactional. It didn't take long for Nkem to realize that her hunger for more love, more passion, more everything had left her utterly alone. Back at the main village, Emmanuel was trying to rebuild his life. The elders had advised him to take another wife, someone who would bring honor back to his household. At first, he resisted. Despite everything, he still loved Nkem, still clung to the memory of the woman who he had first married. But love wasn't enough to erase the shame she had brought upon him. One evening, as he sat by the fire in his now empty house, he made his decision. He would remarry. But this time, he would choose a woman of virtue, someone who would respect him and sanctify their marriage. The elders wasted no time in arranging the match. Within weeks, Emmanuel was married to Amara, a soft-spoken woman with a kind heart and a strong sense of duty. She brought warmth back into his home, filling the empty spaces Nkem had left behind. But even as Emmanuel moved on, a part of him still wondered about Nkem. Where was she? Was she happy? Did she regret leaving him? He kept these thoughts to himself, burying them beneath the surface of his new life. One night, as Nkem lay in her hut, a sharp knock at the door startled her awake. It was unusual for visitors to come so late, and even more unusual for them to knock. She rose slowly, wrapping a cloth around her body before opening the door. Standing before her was Mama Obi, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Nkem," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder as if someone might be listening. "You must stop this. This life you're living, it will bring you nothing but sorrow." Nkem laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the still light. "Is that what you came here to tell me, Mama Obi? To lecture me like the others?" "This is not lecture," Mama Obi said. "It is a warning. The spirits are angry. They said, what you are doing, they will not let you continue." Nkem's laughter died in her throat. She had always believed in the power of spirits, in the unseen forces that govern their world, but she refused to let fear dictate her life. "Biko Nawa, go home, Mama Obi," she said, closing her door. "I don't need your warnings." But that night, as she lay in darkness, the old woman's words haunted her. The first sign came a week later. Nkem woke up to find a deep festering wound on her leg. Despite having no memory of injuring herself, she treated it with herbs, but it refused to heal. The pain grew worse with each passing day, spreading up her legs into their hips. Then came the nightmares. Every night she dreamed of shadows creeping into her heart, the cold hands wrapping around her throat. She would wake up gasping for air, her body drenched in sweat. The final blow came when one of her lovers, a married man named Elle, collapsed and died on her doorstep. The villagers claimed it was the spirit's punishment, a sign that Nkem's sins had finally caught up with her. Words of her curse spread quickly. The men who once flocked at her now avoided her like a plague, and the women whispered about her downfall with barely concealed glee. Nkem knew she couldn't go on like this. Her body was failing. Her spirit was broken. In her desperation, she turned to one person she thought she would never see again, Emmanuel. She found him in the yam fields, his hands dirty and his back bent under the weight of the sun. When she saw him, he froze, his face a mark of disbelief. "Nkem," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emmanuel," she said, falling to her knees. "Please help me." He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stared at her, as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with one he had once loved. "I was wrong," she continued, her voice cracking. "I see that now. I was greedy, selfish. I even destroyed our marriage, and I destroyed myself. But please, Emmanuel, if you ever loved me, help me." For a long moment, Emmanuel said nothing. Then, with a heavy sigh, he reached out a hand to help her. The next day, Emmanuel took Nkem to the village priest, who performed a cleansing ritual to rid her of the curse. It was a painful process, both physically and emotionally. Nkem was forced to confront her sins, to admit her wrongdoing not just to Emmanuel but to herself. The wounds on her legs began to heal, and the nightmares ceased, but the scars, both visible and invisible, remained. Nkem never returned to Emmanuel's house. She knew their marriage was beyond repair, and she didn't want to disrupt the life he had built with Amara. Instead, she chose to live quietly, away from the judgmental eyes of the village. She spent her days tending to a small farm and her nights praying for forgiveness. She would never forget the choices that had led her down such a dark path, but she vowed to spend the rest of her life making amends. As for Emmanuel, he found peace with Amara, raising a family and rebuilding his reputation. He rarely thought of Nkem, but when he did, it was a mixture of sadness and relief. In the end, both of them found a way to move on, though the scars of their shared past would always linger, a reminder of the choices that have shaped their lives. We have come to the end of this interesting tale. Let me know your thoughts about the story in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the notification bell so you will never miss when I post. Till I come your way next time. Bye.